My name is Connie, and I'm 28 years old, working as a marketing executive in Chicago. Last Thanksgiving, I watched my parents destroy my sister Megan in front of our entire family. She arrived late to dinner exhausted from her third job wearing the same worn coat she'd had for years. The cold look my parents gave her when she walked in should have warned me something terrible was coming. But nothing could have prepared me for what they were about to announce. Before I share what happened next, let me know where you're watching from. Please like and subscribe if you've ever stood up for someone you love. What my parents did that night changed our family forever, and the move I made in response is something they never saw coming. Growing up in our suburban Chicago home, success wasn't just expected, it was demanded. My parents built their entire identity around their image in our wealthy community. Every dinner party, every country club gathering, every social event was a carefully orchestrated display of perfection. And for most of my life, I played my part perfectly. I was the golden child, the one who got straight A's without trying, who got into Northwestern for my MBA, who landed a six-figure job at a Fortune 500 company before graduation. When I got engaged to David, a successful corporate lawyer, my parents practically threw a parade. They loved introducing me at their social gatherings, their voices dripping with pride as they listed my accomplishments like items on a resume. But then there was Megan, 3 years younger and completely different from what they wanted. While I was calculating profit margins, she was painting sunsets. While I was networking at corporate events, she was teaching art to kids at the community center for free. She got her degree in fine arts from a state school, and I'll never forget the disappointment in my father's voice when she announced her major. "Art isn't a career," he'd said coldly. "It's a hobby for people who can afford it." The divide started small but grew wider each year. When Megan graduated, our parents didn't even attend her exhibition. They said they had a business dinner that couldn't be rescheduled, but I saw them at the country club that night, laughing with their friends. When she got her first real commission for a mural downtown, they dismissed it as finger painting for hippies. I watched my sister shrink a little more each time they criticized her. She started coming to fewer family dinners, started calling less often. When her engagement fell apart because her fiancé wanted her to give up art for a real job, our parents actually said she was lucky he showed his true colors before the wedding, completely missing the irony that they felt the same way he did. The financial struggles made everything worse. Megan worked 3 part-time jobs to pay her student loans and rent a tiny studio apartment where she both lived and painted. She worked retail during the day, waited tables at night, and cleaned offices on weekends. She was exhausted constantly, but she never stopped creating art. I'd secretly slip her money whenever I could, telling her it was payment for paintings I'd commissioned for my office, even though we both knew I was paying 10 times what she'd normally charge. Last month, our parents found out about the money I'd been giving her. I'd never seen my father so furious. "You're enabling her failure," he'd shouted, his face red with rage. "She needs to hit rock bottom before she'll give up this ridiculous dream and get a real job." My mother had been even colder. "We didn't raise you to waste your success on someone who refuses to help themselves." That was 3 weeks before Thanksgiving. Then came the email from our mother sent to all the extended family. "Important family announcement to be made at Thanksgiving dinner. Please ensure everyone attends." Megan had called me, and for the first time in years, she sounded hopeful. "Maybe they're finally coming around," she'd said. "I just got accepted into a group exhibition at the Morrison Gallery. Maybe they want to celebrate it." I wanted to share her optimism, but something felt wrong. Our parents never made announcements unless they were about their own accomplishments or mine. Still, I told myself maybe they were changing. Maybe they'd finally seen how hard Megan was working. Thanksgiving arrived gray and cold. The house was perfectly decorated as always. My mother had hired caterers to supplement her cooking, ensuring everything would be flawless. The dining room table was set for 20 with the good china and crystal glasses that only came out for special occasions. Family members arrived throughout the day. Uncle James with his investment banker son Brad and lawyer daughter Jennifer. Aunt Patricia with her 3 kids, all doctors or engineers. Aunt Helen. The only one who ever stood up for Megan came alone as always. Everyone gathered in the living room, drinks in hand, catching up on their latest successes and achievements. Megan arrived an hour before dinner, and my heart broke a little when I saw her. She'd clearly tried to look nice wearing her one good dress, but exhaustion was written across her face. She'd worked until 3 in the morning at the restaurant and then opened at the retail store at 7. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, and her hands shook slightly from too much coffee and not enough sleep. "You look tired, dear," Aunt Patricia said, her tone suggesting this was a character flaw rather than a consequence of working 60 hours a week. "Just busy," Megan replied quietly, forcing a smile. My mother appeared in the doorway. "Everyone, dinner is served." We filed into the dining room, taking our assigned seats. My parents sat at opposite ends of the table, the king and queen of their domain. I sat at my father's right hand, the place of honor. Megan was placed near the middle, lost among cousins and aunts, practically invisible. The meal began normally enough. Compliments flowed about the perfectly cooked turkey, the elaborate side dishes, the expensive wines my father had selected. Conversations bubbled about recent promotions, successful deals, vacation homes, purchased children accepted into Ivy League schools. The usual performance of prosperity that defined every family gathering. Megan stayed quiet throughout the meal, pushing food around her plate, clearly too tired to eat much. I kept glancing at her, wanting to say something supportive, but not wanting to draw attention to her exhaustion. She looked so small sitting there, surrounded by successful relatives discussing their achievements, while she could barely keep her eyes open. We'd finished the main course and servers were clearing plates when my father stood up, tapping his crystal water glass with his knife. The clear ringing sound silenced all conversation immediately. "Family," my father began, his voice carrying that same boardroom authority he'd perfected over 30 years in business. "Your mother and I have asked you here not just for Thanksgiving, but for an important announcement about the future of this family." Everyone leaned forward with interest. I noticed Megan straighten slightly in her chair, that fragile hope still flickering in her tired eyes. My mother stood as well, moving to stand beside my father. They looked like corporate executives about to announce quarterly earnings, rather than parents addressing their family at Thanksgiving dinner. "As you all know," my mother said, her voice crisp and businesslike, "Charles and I have always believed in investing wisely and cutting our losses when investments fail to perform." A cold feeling started creeping up my spine. This wasn't the language of parents talking about their children. This was corporate speak, and I'd heard it enough in boardrooms to know it meant someone was about to be terminated. "We've given this considerable thought," my father continued, adjusting his glasses like he did before delivering bad news at board meetings. "And we've come to a difficult but necessary decision regarding Megan." Every eye in the room turned to my sister. She seemed to physically shrink in her chair, her shoulders curving inward as if trying to protect herself from what was coming. The hope in her eyes was dimming like a candle being slowly suffocated. "Megan has had every opportunity we've provided," my mother said, her voice completely devoid of any maternal warmth. "Private schools that cost $40,000 a year. College education that left us $100,000 poorer. A stable home in one of the best neighborhoods in Illinois. Yet she has consistently failed to show any return on that investment." "What are you talking about?" Megan's voice was barely above a whisper, her face growing paler with each word. My father's jaw tightened with irritation. "We're talking about 25 years of resources, time, and money poured into someone who refuses to accept reality. You work 3 dead-end jobs that any high school dropout could do. You live in squalor in a studio apartment that's smaller than our garage. You pursue a hobby as if it were a career despite years of evidence that you have no remarkable talent. You are quite simply no longer worth investing in." The silence that followed was deafening. I could hear my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. Could hear Megan's sharp intake of breath. Could hear the uncomfortable shifting of relatives in their chairs. "Effective immediately," my mother announced, as if reading from a prepared statement. Megan is being removed from the will, the family trust, and any future financial support. We've already informed her landlord that we will no longer be guaranteeing her lease. We've also spoken to her employers to ensure they understand she has no family backing should any issues arise. You called my bosses, Megan gasped, her face draining of all color. You told them I have no family support? Do you know what that could do to my job security? We're being cruel to be kind, my father said, using the same tone he used when firing employees. You need to understand that your choices have consequences. You're 25 years old, Megan. It's time you learned that if you can't succeed on your own merit, you don't deserve to succeed at all. She's a failure, my mother added, looking around the table as if seeking validation from the assembled relatives. A complete disappointment to this family. We're done pretending otherwise. She isn't worth a penny anymore. She's done. Uncle James nodded slowly, setting down his wine glass. Sometimes tough love is necessary. My Brad learned that when I cut him off during his party phase in college. Look at him now, youngest partner at his firm. Brad smirked from across the table, his expression smug. Best thing you ever did for me, Dad. Taught me that success isn't handed to you, it's earned. Aunt Patricia chimed in her diamond earrings, catching the light as she shook her head sympathetically. Megan, dear, you made your choices. Art is a lovely hobby, but you can't expect your parents to fund your fantasies forever. At some point, we all have to grow up and face reality. I watched in horror as more family members began nodding in agreement. These people who had watched Megan grow up, who had attended her graduations and birthdays, who had given her Christmas presents and hugs at family reunions, were sitting here calmly discussing her disposal like she was a failed business venture being written off for tax purposes. Tears were streaming down Megan's face, now running in silent rivers down her cheeks. She tried to speak, but only managed a choked sob that she quickly stifled with her napkin. Oh, stop being dramatic, my mother said coldly, waving her hand dismissively. This victim mentality is exactly why you're in this position. Successful people don't cry when faced with reality, Megan. They adapt. They evolve. They find a way to succeed. But I am trying to succeed, Megan managed to say through her tears. I work constantly. I never stop working. Working minimum wage jobs isn't success, my father said flatly. It's survival, and barely that. That's when something inside me finally snapped. But before I could speak, before I could defend my sister, Megan pushed back her chair with a screech that seemed to echo through the room. She stood unsteadily, swaying slightly, then fled toward the bathroom. I immediately followed, ignoring my father's voice calling after me. Let her go, Connie. She needs to process this alone. It's time she learned to handle disappointment without someone holding her hand. I found Megan collapsed on the bathroom floor, curled into a ball, sobbing so hard her entire body was shaking. She kept gasping the same words over and over between desperate attempts to breathe. Maybe they're right. Maybe I'm worthless. Maybe they're right about everything. I knelt beside her, pulling her into my arms despite her weak attempts to push me away. Listen to me, I said firmly, holding her tighter. They're not right. They're cruel and wrong, and I won't let them do this to you. How can they just throw me away? She sobbed into my shoulder. I'm their daughter. How can they just decide I'm worthless? How can they announce it to everyone, like they're proud of giving up on me? Because they're broken, I said, my own voice thick with emotion. Not you, them. They're so broken they can't see worth beyond dollar signs. And I promise you, I won't let them destroy you. We stayed there for 10 minutes while Megan cried herself out, her sobs gradually subsiding into hiccups and sniffles. When we finally returned to the dining room, dessert was being served as if nothing had happened. Pumpkin pie and coffee, polite conversation about the weather, my parents presiding over it all with satisfied smiles, like they'd just successfully completed a business transaction. After dessert, I cornered my parents in the kitchen, while the other relatives migrated to the living room for coffee and after-dinner drinks. The caterers had finished cleaning and left, giving us privacy for what I knew would be an ugly confrontation. How could you do that to her? I demanded, keeping my voice low but unable to hide the fury burning in my chest. How could you humiliate your own daughter like that? My father didn't even look up from where he was carefully wrapping leftover turkey. We did what needed to be done. Something you're apparently too soft to understand despite your business education. Too soft? I'm her sister, I'm supposed to care about her. Which is exactly why you can't see this situation clearly. My mother said, methodically arranging leftover pie in containers with the same precision she used to arrange flowers. You've always enabled her, Connie. Always made excuses for her failures. Always tried to cushion her from the harsh realities of life. What failures? She works 3 jobs. She's supporting herself entirely while pursuing her passion. Do you know how hard that is? Barely supporting herself, my father corrected finally, looking at me with those cold gray eyes. She lives paycheck to paycheck in a studio apartment that probably has rats. She has no savings, no assets, no viable career path, no future. And passion. He laughed bitterly. Passion doesn't pay bills. Passion doesn't build wealth. Passion is what people with trust funds can afford to pursue. She has her art. She just got accepted into a group show at Morrison Gallery. Her finger paintings. My mother laughed, a sound like ice cracking. Please, Connie. I've seen what she creates. Amateur work that no serious collector would ever purchase. Morrison Gallery probably just needs to fill space or meet some diversity quota. You've never even been to one of her exhibitions. You've never given her work a chance. Because we have better things to do than pretend she has talent we both know she lacks. The cruelty of it took my breath away. These weren't parents talking about their child. These were cold, calculating people discussing an investment that hadn't paid off. But before I could respond, Uncle James appeared in the doorway. Charles' excellent decision with Megan. Sometimes you have to cut the dead weight. Speaking of investments, I wanted to discuss that opportunity you mentioned last week. My firm is always looking for solid partnerships. My father's entire demeanor changed instantly, becoming animated and engaged. Of course. Let's go to my study. I have the prospectus there. They left me standing there with my mother, who was now wrapping leftovers, as if we'd just had a normal family dinner instead of a ritual sacrifice of my sister's dignity. Mom, I tried one more time. She's your daughter. Doesn't that mean anything to you? She finally looked at me directly, and her eyes were like Arctic ice. I have one daughter worth claiming, the successful one. The other is a stranger who happens to share our DNA, nothing more. I found Megan in the living room, surrounded by relatives discussing their latest accomplishments, while she sat silent and invisible in their midst. Cousin Jennifer was bragging about her newest acquisition for her private collection. Brad was discussing his firm's latest merger. Megan might as well have been furniture for all the attention they paid her. When she saw me, she stood up shakily. I need to leave, she whispered. Let me drive you home. No, I have my car. I just need to go. I can't be here anymore. But as we walked to the front door, my father's voice stopped us cold. Oh, Megan, one more thing before you leave. He stood in the doorway of his study, Uncle James visible behind him. The joint account your mother and I set up for you years ago, we've closed it. The money was transferred back to us this morning. Megan went rigid, her hand freezing on the doorknob. That had my commission money in it. $3,000 from my last mural project. Money I earned myself. That was my money. Money you earned using skills we paid to develop. Consider it partial repayment for your education. You stole from me. You actually stole my money. We reclaimed our investment, my mother said smoothly, appearing from the kitchen. And really, dear, $3,000 for 3 months of work. That rather proves our point about your earning potential, doesn't it? Megan looked like she might collapse right there in the foyer. That money had been her emergency fund, her safety net, the first real savings she'd managed to accumulate. I knew because she'd told me just last week how proud she was to finally have a cushion, however small. I'll give you the money, I said quickly. No, you won't, my father said sharply, his voice taking on a threatening edge. Any money you give her will be considered a violation of our family agreement. If you continue to enable her, you'll face consequences as well. What consequences? You'll disown me too. We'll reconsider your position in the company, your access to family resources, your inheritance, the connections we've facilitated for your career. Do you really want to throw away everything you've built for someone who refuses to help herself? The threat hung in the air like a poisonous cloud. They were actually threatening to destroy my life too if I helped my sister. But then my mother delivered the final blow. Besides, it's already done. We've spoken to the extended family. Everyone has agreed that Megan needs to learn self-sufficiency. No one will be offering her any assistance going forward. You turned everyone against me. Megan's voice was hollow, defeated. We opened their eyes to reality. And at Christmas, we'll be making it clear that you're no longer welcome at family gatherings until you've made something of yourself. We won't have you dragging down the family's reputation any longer. Our reputation? I couldn't help but laugh bitterly. What reputation? The one where you pretend to be perfect while destroying your own daughter. The reputation we've spent 30 years building, my father said coldly. The one that opens doors, creates opportunities, generates wealth. The one you've benefited from your entire life, Connie. Megan turned and walked out without another word. I started to follow, but she held up her hand to stop me. Please, she said, tears streaming down her face again. I need to be alone right now. I need to think. I need to figure out what I'm going to do. I watched her drive away in her beat-up Honda, then turned back to face my parents. They were already heading back to their guests, casual and unaffected, as if they hadn't just destroyed their daughter's life in the most cruel and public way possible. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Megan alone in her tiny apartment, probably crying herself sick, wondering how she was going to pay rent without the security of her emergency fund. I thought about the cruelty of what they'd done, the calculated nature of it, the way they'd orchestrated maximum humiliation. But more than that, something didn't add up. My parents were cruel, yes, but they were also calculated. They never made moves without reason, never took action without benefit. Disowning Megan publicly like this, ensuring everyone knew about it, calling her employers, it felt like they were covering for something, or preparing for something. At 2 a.m, I gave up on sleep and opened my laptop. I started with what I knew, accessing our shared family cloud drive, where my father kept business documents. He'd given me access years ago when I started working at his company, and apparently never thought to revoke it. The first crack in their perfect facade appeared in a business statement from 6 months ago. Significant losses in my father's investment portfolio. Not just losses, but devastating ones. Nearly $3 million gone in failed ventures and bad stock picks. I kept digging using the forensic accounting skills I'd learned in my MBA program. Bank statements, tax documents, business filings, credit reports. I probably shouldn't have been able to access, but did through my company's resources. With each discovery, the picture became clearer and more disturbing. My parents were broke, not just struggling, but facing complete financial ruin. The house I'd grown up in, the one they'd owned for 25 years, was mortgaged 3 times over. They'd taken out a home equity line of credit, then a second mortgage, then private loans, using the house as collateral. The country club membership they bragged about was 3 months behind in dues with threatening letters about cancellation. Credit cards were maxed out to the tune of $200,000 across 12 different accounts. They'd liquidated their retirement accounts, paying massive penalties for early withdrawal. The investment properties they bragged about at every family gathering had been quietly sold at massive losses over the past year. They'd been living entirely on credit and appearances for at least 2 years, maintaining their lifestyle through increasingly desperate measures. The cars they drove were leased, and they were behind on payments. The jewelry my mother wore to charity galas I discovered through receipts was fake. She'd sold the real pieces quietly through private dealers, replacing them with cubic zirconia and gold plating. Even tonight's Thanksgiving dinner, I realized with shock, was probably put on credit cards that wouldn't be paid. The caterers, the expensive wines, the perfect feast, all of it was borrowed money they didn't have. But that wasn't even the worst part. I found emails between my parents and Uncle James dating back 3 months. They were discussing a solution to their financial problems. The solution, it turned out, was me. They were planning to leverage my engagement to David to use my position at my company to broker deals that would benefit them financially. There were references to moving in with David and me after our wedding, selling their house quietly, and using the story of downsizing and retirement as cover for their bankruptcy. They saw me as their meal ticket. My success, my connections, my wealthy fiancé, it was all just another investment to them. And Megan was a liability. They couldn't afford dead weight that might drag down their rescue plan. Then I found the folder that made my blood run cold. It was labeled, Megan Opportunities Declined. Inside were emails dating back 2 years. The Morrison Gallery had reached out 3 times about showing Megan's work, each time more enthusiastic than the last. A collector in New York wanted to commission a series of paintings for $30,000. An art magazine wanted to do a feature on emerging artists and had specifically requested her portfolio. A design firm wanted to hire her as a creative consultant. An artist residency program in Vermont had accepted her application with full funding. All these opportunities had come through our parents' address, since Megan had used it for professional correspondence to seem more established than her studio apartment address would suggest. They'd declined everything on her behalf. Told the gallery she wasn't interested. Told the collector she'd stopped painting. Told the magazine she was no longer pursuing art professionally. Told the design firm she'd taken other employment. Told the residency program she had to decline due to family obligations. They'd been systematically sabotaging her for years while telling her she was failing. But why? Then I found the email that explained everything. It was from my mother to my father, dated 6 months ago. We need Connie to believe she's our only successful child. If Megan succeeds as an artist, Connie might feel less obligated to support us. Megan's failure is necessary for our survival. They hadn't just given up on Megan. They'd actively destroyed her opportunities to ensure I'd remain their lifeline. I screenshot everything, saved it all to multiple clouds, emailed copies to myself and David. My hands were shaking with rage by the time I finished. Then I called David, even though it was past 3 a.m. Connie, what's wrong? His voice was groggy but immediately alert. I told him everything. The dinner, the cruelty, the discoveries I'd made. He listened without interrupting, though I could hear his sharp intake of breath at several points. Those bastards, he said quietly when I finished. Sorry, I know they're your parents, but there's no other word for it. No, you're right. They are bastards. And they're planning to use us, David. Use our wedding, our money, our connections. They see us as their retirement plan. Over my dead body. What do you want to do? I want to destroy them the same way they tried to destroy Megan. But more than that, I want to save her. She has real talent, David. Real opportunities that they've been stealing from her. Then we'll do both. I'll call my partner who specializes in corporate fraud first thing. This level of deception, the theft of her commission money, the interference with her business opportunities, some of this might actually be criminal. And Megan? How do I help her without triggering their threats? Leave that to me. There are ways to structure support that they can't touch. And Connie, we're going to make this right. I promise. After we hung up, I called Megan. It rang 6 times before she answered, her voice hoarse from crying. Connie, please. I can't talk about it anymore tonight. You don't have to talk. Just listen. Tomorrow at brunch, everything changes. I found out what they've been hiding, Meg. All of it. There was a long pause. What do you mean? What did you find? Evidence that you're not the failure in this family. You never were. They've been sabotaging you, Meg. Hiding opportunities, declining offers on your behalf. You're not worthless. You're a threat to their plan. That doesn't make sense. What plan? The plan where they move in with David and me because they're completely broke and see us as their only way out. They needed you to fail so I'd feel obligated to take care of them. Silence. Then a sob, but this time it sounded different. Not despair, but something else. Maybe rage. Maybe hope. They hid opportunities from me. Gallery offers Meg, 3 from Morrison alone, a $30,000 commission, a magazine feature, an artist residency with full funding. They declined them all without telling you. They stole my future. They tried to, but tomorrow we take it back. Can you trust me? I don't know if I can face them again, Connie. You won't be facing them alone. I'll be right there with you. And after tomorrow, you'll never have to feel worthless again, I promise. The next morning I woke with fierce determination. David arrived at 7 with coffee and his laptop, having spent the rest of the night preparing. I've created a presentation, he said, setting up at my kitchen table. Every piece of evidence organized and undeniable. If we're going to expose them, let's do it properly. We spent the morning fine-tuning our plan. The country club's Sunday brunch was a tradition, and the private dining room had a projector system for business presentations. My parents often used it to show off their supposed successes to impressed relatives. Today it would be their undoing. I texted Megan, "Wear your best dress. Today you stop being their victim and become their reckoning." She responded with just one word, "Ready." We arrived at the country club separately. The private dining room was already half full with extended family, everyone fresh from church and ready for mimosas and gossip. My parents held court at the head table, my mother resplendent in designer clothes that I now knew were bought with credit she couldn't afford. When they saw Megan walk in with me and David, their faces darkened. "I thought we made ourselves clear last night." My father started, his voice low and threatening. "Crystal clear," I said calmly. "And now it's my turn to make something clear to everyone." My mother laughed nervously. "Darling, this isn't the time for dramatics. We're having a lovely family brunch." "I agree completely. This is the perfect time for truth." I stood up, picking up my champagne glass and tapping it with a spoon. The room quieted, everyone turning to look at me expectantly. "I want to talk to you all about investments." I began, watching my father's face relax slightly, thinking I was on his side. Specifically about knowing the difference between a bad investment and a sabotaged one. Uncle James looked interested from across the room. "Go on, Connie. This sounds like a valuable business lesson." "Oh, it is. You see, last night my parents called Megan a failed investment. They said she was worthless, done not worth a penny. But I've discovered something interesting." I clicked the remote David had handed me, and the projector screen behind me lit up with the first email from Morrison Gallery. "This is from Morrison Gallery, one of Chicago's most prestigious contemporary art spaces. They offered Megan a solo exhibition 6 months ago. She never received this email because it went to my parents' address, and they declined on her behalf without telling her." Gasps echoed around the room. Megan's face had gone white as she read the email for the first time, seeing the gallery director's effusive praise for her work. "That's not all," I continued, clicking to the next slide. "This collector in New York wanted to commission a series of paintings for $30,000. My parents told him Megan had stopped painting entirely." "That's a lie." My father stood up, his face flushing red. Should I show them your email response, Dad? The one where you wrote, and I quote, "Our daughter has realized art is not a viable career and has moved on to more practical pursuits." I clicked again. There it was, in his own email account with his signature at the bottom. The room erupted in shocked murmurs. Aunt Helen was on her feet, her face furious. "Charles, how could you do this to your own daughter?" "There were circumstances you don't understand," my mother said weakly. "Oh, you mean these circumstances." I clicked to the next slide. Their debt appeared on screen in devastating detail. The mortgages, the maxed credit cards, the liquidated retirement accounts, the business losses. Everything laid out in undeniable black and white. $3 million in debt," I said clearly. "House mortgaged 3 times. Credit cards maxed. Retirement gone. Country club membership in default. Even tonight's brunch." I looked around meaningfully. "Is probably on a credit card that won't be paid." My father lunged toward my laptop, but David stepped smoothly between us. "I'd think very carefully before you do anything aggressive, Charles," David said calmly. I'm not just your future son-in-law. I'm also an attorney who's been documenting financial fraud. This is family business, my father roared. Family business. Like telling Megan's employers she has mental health issues to threaten her job security, like stealing $3,000 from her account, like planning to move into my house after the wedding because you can't afford your own. Each accusation came with supporting documentation on the screen: emails, bank statements, screenshots of texts. The evidence was overwhelming and undeniable. Uncle James was reading the emails about the business deal my parents had promised him through my company, his face turning purple with rage. You were planning to use me. Use my firm's reputation to cover your bankruptcy, Charles. I've known you for 30 years. How could you— James, please let me explain. My father pleaded, all authority gone from his voice. But I wasn't done. Here's the most interesting part. While they were calling Megan worthless, they were actively ensuring she'd fail. Why? Because they need me to feel obligated to support them. If Megan succeeded, I might feel less responsible for them. Her failure was necessary for their survival plan. I clicked to my mother's email, her own words condemning them. Jennifer, the cousin who collected art, stood up slowly. Wait, I know the Morrison Gallery director. Are you saying Megan's work was actually accepted there multiple times? Not just accepted, praised. They called her one of the most promising emerging artists they'd seen in years. The director compared her use of color to early Rothko. I clicked through more slides showing email after email. Galleries, collectors, magazines, residency programs, all reaching out, all declined by my parents without Megan's knowledge. Megan was crying, but these weren't tears of despair. She was seeing for the first time that she hadn't been failing. She'd been succeeding all along, but that success had been stolen from her. I have an announcement, I said, raising my glass again. David and I are opening a gallery. Megan will be our first featured artist and a full partner in the business. We've already incorporated, and thanks to David's connections, we have 3 collectors who were turned away by my parents already committed to purchases. You can't do this, my father said, but his voice had lost all its power. He sounded like what he was, a desperate man watching his last hope crumble. I can, and I am. My entire trust fund plus David's investment will be going into this venture, and based on the interest we've already received, we project profitability within 6 months. Aunt Helen stood up, her checkbook already in hand. I want to invest. $50,000. Jennifer nodded enthusiastically. Count me in for $25,000. I've been looking to diversify my portfolio, and supporting emerging artists aligns with my values. One by one, family members who'd agreed with my parents the night before were offering support. Not out of pity, but because they were seeing the evidence of Megan's talent, the professional validation that had been hidden from them. My parents were shrinking in their seats, their carefully constructed image crumbling in real time as relatives realized they'd been deceived. Oh, and Mom, Dad. That family support you were counting on, the moving in with us after the wedding, using my connections to save yourselves, that's never happening. David held up a document. I had our prenuptial agreement amended this morning. It specifically excludes Charles and Margaret from any financial benefit from our marriage, present or future. It also includes a restraining provision if they attempt to interfere with Connie's business ventures. You can't cut us off, my mother whispered. We're your parents. Megan stood up slowly and the room fell silent. She looked at our parents with a strength I'd never seen before. You called me worthless. Said I wasn't worth a penny. But you knew that wasn't true, didn't you? You knew I had talent. You knew I had opportunities. You just needed me to fail so you could survive. She picked up her champagne glass, her hand steady now. You were right about one thing. I'm done. Done believing your lies. Done accepting your cruelty. Done being your scapegoat. But I'm not worthless. The pre-sale commitments for my first exhibition are already at $200,000. So you were wrong. I'm not worth nothing. I'm worth everything you'll never have again. Success earned honestly. The brunch ended in chaos. My parents left in humiliation, Uncle James following them to the parking lot, undoubtedly to sever whatever business dealings remained. Other relatives surrounded Megan asking about her work, apologizing for believing the lies, making commitments to attend her exhibition. As we watched our parents drive away in their leased Mercedes, Megan turned to me. "You saved me." "No," I said, hugging her tight. "You survived long enough for the truth to come out. That's its own kind of strength." 3 months later, Morrison Gallery was packed for Megan's opening night. Every piece had a red dot beside it within the first hour indicating it was sold. Critics from the Tribune and Sun-Times were there, both taking notes for what would become glowing reviews in the next day's papers. Megan stood in the center of it all, radiant in a way I'd never seen her. She wore a dress she'd bought with her own money from pre-sales, and she moved through the crowd with confidence, discussing her work with collectors who'd flown in from New York and Los Angeles specifically for the show. The transformation was remarkable. Gone was the exhausted girl who'd shrunk into herself at family dinners. In her place stood an artist who knew her worth, who could articulate her vision, who commanded respect in her own gallery. David and I watched from the side, his arm around my waist, as we observed the success we'd helped facilitate. "No regrets about the trust fund?" he asked quietly. "Are you kidding? This is the best investment I've ever made. Look at her, David. She's alive in a way she never was before." And it was true. The gallery was exceeding all projections, but more importantly, Megan was thriving. She'd quit all 3 of her dead-end jobs, focusing entirely on her art. She'd moved to a better apartment with actual space to paint. She was teaching workshops for underprivileged youth, remembering what it felt like to have someone try to kill your dreams. Our parents had tried to contact me several times through lawyers seeking financial assistance. Their house was in foreclosure. Dad's business had folded after Uncle James spread word of his deception. They were facing bankruptcy, the very fate they'd tried to avoid by sacrificing Megan. I'd ignored every request until last week, when Megan surprised me. "I want to send them something," she'd said after her 5th sold-out show. "Money, Meg, after everything they did." No, not money, a painting. She'd created a piece specifically for them. It was beautiful and haunting, showing 2 figures trapped in a golden cage of their own making, while a bird flew free above them. The cage was made of dollar bills and stock certificates, the figures reaching through the bars toward a light they couldn't reach. The title was "What Love Should Look Like." We had it delivered to their small apartment on the outskirts of town, the one they'd moved to after losing the house. They never acknowledged receiving it, but the delivery confirmation showed it was accepted. A year later, we opened our second gallery location in New York. Megan's work was now in permanent collections at 3 major museums. She'd been featured in Art Forum and Modern Painters magazine. She had a waiting list for commissions that stretched 2 years out. She'd also started a foundation for young artists from difficult family situations, providing not just financial support, but mentorship and therapy resources. She called it the Worth Everything Foundation. "Every kid deserves someone who believes in their worth," she'd said at the foundation's launch, especially when their own family doesn't. Our parents never reached out directly again. We heard through distant relatives that they'd moved to Florida, where no one knew their history. My father was working as a consultant for a small firm. My mother gave etiquette lessons to supplement their Social Security. They were surviving, which was more than they'd planned for Megan. The last update came from Aunt Helen, who'd run into them at a grocery store in Tampa. "They looked older," she said, worn down. They'd asked about us, but when Helen started to tell them about Megan's latest museum acquisition, they'd walked away. 2 years have passed since that Thanksgiving dinner that changed everything. The gallery has become more than a business. It's become a sanctuary for dismissed dreams and rejected artists. We now represent 12 artists, all of whom were told at some point that their art wasn't valuable, wasn't practical, wasn't worth pursuing. The healing hasn't been linear. Megan still has days where the old voices creep in, where she questions whether her success is real or if she deserves it. She's been in therapy for 18 months, working through the complex trauma of being raised by parents who saw their children as investments rather than human beings. "They stole so much more than opportunities," she told me once. "They stole my ability to trust my own perception of reality. When the people who are supposed to love you unconditionally tell you you're worthless, you believe them. But she's learning to trust herself again. Every sold painting, every positive review, every young artist she mentors is a small act of rebellion against those voices. I've had my own journey too. Leaving my corporate job to run the galleries full-time meant letting go of the path my parents had laid out for me. It meant discovering who I was beyond their definition of success. David has been incredible through it all, never making me feel like I'm risking our security, always reminding me that success isn't just about money. Your parents measured worth in dollars, he said once. But look what you're building. You're measuring it in dreams realized in artists supported in lives changed. That's real wealth. The scholarship fund Megan established has already supported 15 young artists in its first year. We review applications together every month, looking for kids whose talent is being dismissed, whose dreams are being discouraged, whose worth is being questioned by the very people who should be their biggest supporters. Last month, we received an application that made us both cry. A 17-year-old painter whose parents had thrown away her art supplies, telling her she was wasting her life. She'd been secretly painting on cardboard with borrowed supplies, hiding her work at school. Megan called her personally to tell her she'd won the scholarship, which covered not just tuition, but supplies, housing, and therapy. Your art matters, Megan told her. Your dreams matter. You matter. Don't let anyone, not even your parents, convince you otherwise. The girl cried so hard she couldn't speak for 5 minutes. These moments, these connections, these saved dreams, they're worth more than any trust fund, any inheritance, any parental approval we might have lost. Our Thursday dinners are sacred now. No matter how busy the galleries get, no matter what exhibitions we're planning, Megan and I meet every Thursday for dinner. Sometimes David joins us, sometimes other artists from the gallery come, but the core is always us. Two sisters who chose each other when their parents chose money. Last week at dinner, Megan gave me a painting. It was smaller than her usual work, more intimate. It showed two women standing together facing a storm, but the storm was breaking apart around them, unable to touch them. "What's this for?" I asked. "For saving me," she said simply. "You saved yourself. I just showed them the evidence." "No," she shook her head. "You believed I was worth saving when I didn't. You fought for me when I couldn't fight for myself. You chose me when they threw me away. That's everything, Connie. That's what family really means." The painting now hangs in my office next to the print of What Love Should Look Like. They're reminders of where we came from and how far we've traveled. But more than that, they're reminders that worth isn't something that can be given or taken away by others. It's inherent. It exists simply because we exist. My parents never understood that. They saw worth as a calculation, a return on investment, a measure of financial success. They couldn't see the value in struggle and passion, in the courage it takes to pursue a dream when everyone tells you it's foolish. But Megan's worth was never in question. It was there in every painting she created while exhausted from 3 jobs. It was there in every free art class she taught, despite barely surviving herself. It was there in her refusal to give up even when her own parents told her she was done. The letter from our parents arrived yesterday. 2 years of silence, and then a single envelope with my mother's handwriting. Inside was a short note and a photograph. The note said, "We saw Megan's exhibition reviewed in the Times. The painting you sent is the only thing we kept from the house. We were wrong." The photograph showed the painting hanging in their small apartment, the only art on otherwise bare walls. I showed it to Megan. She looked at it for a long moment, then handed it back. "Too little, too late," she said quietly. "But I'm glad they kept it. Maybe someday they'll understand what it means." "Do you want to respond?" She thought about it, then shook her head. "No, they made their choice. They chose their image over their daughter, their reputation over reality, their fear of failure over love. I've made my choice too. I choose to surround myself with people who see my worth, who celebrate my success, who love me for who I am, not what I can provide." And that's the real victory. Not the gallery's success, not the museum acquisitions, not the critical acclaim. The real victory is that Megan no longer needs their validation. She's found her worth in her own achievements, her own community, her own definition of success. Before you go, I want to ask you something. Have you ever been told you weren't worth it? Have your dreams been dismissed by the very people who should support them? Have you been made to feel like a failed investment rather than a beloved child? If so, I want you to know something. You are worth everything. Your dreams matter. Your passion has value. And somewhere out there, someone sees your worth even if the people who should can't. What gave you the strength to keep going when everyone told you to give up? What moment made you realize your worth wasn't determined by someone else's inability to see it? Please share your story in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, if you know someone who needs to hear that they're worth everything, please like this video and share it with them. Subscribe to hear more stories of people who refuse to let others define their worth. Thank you for watching, for being part of this journey with us. Remember, you are not an investment to be calculated. You are not a return to be measured. You are a human being with inherent worth that no one, not even your parents, can take away. Your worth exists simply because you exist. Never let anyone convince you otherwise.